Hey everyone, and welcome back to Breathe Easy. Today we're talking about one of those ventilator topics that tends to make people pause, second guess themselves, or feel like they're missing something, and that's APVcmv, PRVC, and volume guarantee. These modes get a bad reputation for being confusing, but I promise you this, the confusion comes from the naming, not from the physiology. Once you understand what the ventilator is actually doing, this mode becomes very predictable and very usable. So let me start by clearing something up right away. APVcmv, which is Adaptive Pressure Ventilation Control Mandatory Ventilation, or SCMV Plus on Hamilton's ventilator, and PRVC, which is Pressure Regulated Volume Control on Mackay, or the Servo U or Servo I, and Volume Guarantee or Volume Control with Auto Flow on the Draeger are not different ideas. They are all the same control strategy with different labels depending on which ventilator brand you're using. When we shift our focus away from the name on the screen and toward how the ventilator is controlling the breath and responding to the patient, everything starts to click. That's the lens we're going to use for the rest of this session today. And if you've ever looked at one of these modes and thought, why does this feel different every time I use it? You're not wrong. These modes don't fit neatly into the classic mental boxes of pressure control versus volume control. And when the things don't fit into a familiar category, our brains flag it as unsafe or unclear. And that's a normal response, not a failure of understanding. A big part of this discomfort comes from the pressure changing when you didn't touch anything. And for many clinicians, changing pressure feels like something that should only happen when we decide to make that change. So when the ventilator does it automatically, it can feel a little bit unsettling. But that's what's really happening, is that the ventilator is adjusting in response to lung mechanics, just faster and more consistently than we do at the bedside. Once we recognize that, those pressure changes stop feeling random and start to feel informative. Here's the anchor concept for this entire mode. These are pressure-controlled breaths, but with a target volume goal. Hold on to that sentence because everything else we talk about is built on it. In this mode, every breath is pressure controlled. The ventilator delivers a pressure-limited, time-cycled breath with a decelerating flow pattern. After the breath is delivered, the ventilator measures the exhale tidal volume and compares it to the target you set. If the volume came back low, the ventilator slightly increases the pressure on the next breath. If it was high, it backs off, so the pressure adjusts. Volume is targeted, and the ventilator is constantly learning breath by breath. Let's talk about control, because this is where sometimes people feel like the ventilator is doing things without them. In this mode, the clinician still sets the goals and the boundaries. You're setting the goals: a target tidal volume, respiratory rate, inspiratory time, PEEP, and FiO2. What you're setting is not a fixed pressure. Instead, you're allowing the ventilator to choose the pressure needed to meet the volume target within the limits you defined. That means that the pressure remains constant within the inspiratory phase. Think of it as shared work. You decide what you want, and the ventilator figures out how to get it there safely. To really trust this mode, it helps to understand how it makes decisions. This mode uses a closed-loop feedback system. A breath is delivered, volume is measured, and pressure is adjusted on the next breath. That's it. So when you see a pressure creeping up over time, that's usually telling you something about the patient, like worsening compliance or increased resistance, not that the ventilator is malfunctioning. Pressure trends become a window into lung mechanics. Let's put this into everyday language. Think about cruise control in your car. You set the speed. You don't control the gas pedal directly. When the road gets steeper, the car gives it a little bit more gas. When it flattens out, it backs off. You don't micromanage it, and you don't panic when the engine sounds different. In this mode, tidal volume is the speed, and the pressure is the gas pedal. The ventilator adjusts automatically to keep things steady despite the changes in lung mechanics. Now let's tackle this branding issue. As you can see in this picture of the slide, You can see that Hamilton Medical calls it adaptive control mandatory ventilation. It just happens to be the first. Draeger has volume control, assist control with auto flow on. Avia calls it PRVC assist control. Covidien calls it ACVC plus. Servo, PRVC, and then Care Station, pressure control, volume guarantee. Just so you know, all of these modes are the same. And in actuality, Hamilton can actually call it an APVcmv or SCMV plus. It depends on what you select when you're setting up your ventilator, as far as from a biomed standpoint. Draeger, depending on which mode selection you do, you can use volume guarantee or volume control with auto flow on. And McKay, commonly it's most known as pressure regulated volume control or PRVC. Different words, same behavior. Once you recognize that, moving between the ventilators becomes a lot less intimidating. So you're not learning a new mode, you're applying the same physiology in a different interface is all. So why do clinicians choose this mode often? This mode allows us to limit excessive pressures while still targeting a consistent tidal volume. It adapts well when lung mechanics are changing. So like your post-operative patients and initially after intubation where patients are commonly sedative and passive. But it's important to remember that the mode supports good ventilation. It doesn't replace assessment or decision making. And let's talk honestly about where things can go sideways. First, this is not volume control. Volume is targeted here, but it's not guaranteed. There is a difference. Second, pressure is not fixed to a specific setting, is variable to achieve the targeted tidal volume, and that's by design. The ventilator is just adjusting on purpose, not malfunctioning. And third, strong spontaneous effort from the patient can throw off the feedback loop. When the patient is pulling really hard, the ventilator might not respond in the way you expect. And naming these pitfalls up front helps us recognize them in the moment instead of second guessing the ventilator. This is where theory meets real world practice. We need to watch the pressure trend over time. Don't fixate on the single number, and the trend tells a story. Make sure you've set appropriate upper pressure limits, and if compliance worsens, you want that safety net in place to prevent excessive pressure delivery. And you need to also monitor your ventilation as well at that point. And if you see a sudden jump in the pressure the vent needs, that's your cue to assess the patient. Think secretions, positioning, pneumothorax, or changing the effort. The bottom line is the mode is a tool, not a replacement for your clinical judgment. This is the perfect place to watch physiology happen. As we walk through the simulator, pay attention to how predictable the ventilator becomes once you understand the logic. So right now it's in pressure regulated volume control, and I just wanted to kind of show you all what this mode and how it differentiates from a true volume control mode. As you can see, pressure timeline at the top, flow in the middle, and volume at the bottom. And changes in the pressure, it could correspond directly to the lung mechanics. If we go to volume control, we have a fixed flow. And then pressure is going to vary at that time. Let's end with the message I want you to keep. At its core, every one of these modes use pressure to achieve the target tidal volume, and that's the anchor. Once you hold on to the framework, ventilator behavior becomes predictable, intuitive, and far less intimidating, regardless of which ventilator you're standing in front of. Different names, same brain. I hope this session helps you feel a little bit more confident at the bedside and helps you keep our patients breathing easy.